The badge scanner beeped twice, just like every other morning, and I had no idea that by lunchtime I would be sitting in the back of a police car, watching my own office building shrink through a window, wondering how 6 months of staying quiet had somehow made me the criminal. By that afternoon, 2 officers were walking me across the parking lot in handcuffs while half the office stood at the windows with their phones out, recording me like I was the most interesting thing that had happened at that company in years. Somebody's phone flash even went off, like this was something worth capturing forever. I did not cry. I did not shout. I kept my eyes on the pavement and let them guide me into the back seat, because underneath all of it, underneath the humiliation and the stares and the whispers I could feel through the glass, I already knew something none of them did yet. 6 months earlier, I had walked into that same building as Dana Whitfield, logistics coordinator, badge number 4471, nothing special, nothing anyone would look at twice. I kept my head down, learned the shipping software, brought my own lunch, and stayed out of the break room gossip. The only thing anyone ever noticed about me was the old silver pen clipped to my badge, worn smooth at the clasp. Corey from receiving used to tease me about it, said it looked like something out of my grandfather's desk drawer. I told him it was my dad's, and I left it at that, because it was easier than explaining what it actually was. Now I was sitting across a metal table from a detective named Ruiz, and I asked him for exactly one thing before he processed anything else. 5 minutes, and a way to play an audio file. He hit play, and I watched his face change in real time. Halfway through, he reached over and paused it himself, looked up at me like he was seeing a completely different person than the one who had walked in an hour earlier. "Ma'am," he said, "do you understand what you just handed me?" I did not answer him yet. That answer belonged to a different part of the story, one that started 3 months before I ever sat in that chair. It started small, the way these things always do. My regional manager, Craig Dalton, had been friendly enough the first few weeks, the kind of friendly that comes with a firm handshake and a promise that my ideas mattered. Then the Fairview account, the one I had spent 6 weeks rebuilding after a shipping error nearly cost us the client, got quietly reassigned to a coworker who had been there 2 years less than me. Nobody told me directly. I found out from a calendar invite I was no longer on. I asked Craig about it in the hallway, kept my voice level, kept it professional. He shrugged and said something about needing fresh eyes on it. Then he added, loud enough for the 2 people walking past us to hear, that maybe I would do better focusing on tasks I could actually finish without hand-holding. I did not react. I just nodded and went back to my desk, because at Will employment means you learn fast that reacting is a luxury you cannot afford. The meeting started disappearing next. Not officially. My name just stopped showing up on the invite list, and when I asked why, Craig told me it was nothing personal, just streamlining. Streamlining apparently meant every strategy conversation happened without the person whose numbers were being discussed. Then I found the discrepancy. 3 shipment logs that did not match the invoices sent to one of our biggest accounts, small enough that most people would have scrolled past it, but I had spent 6 months learning that software cold, and the pattern was there if you knew where to look. I flagged it to Craig directly, in writing, through the internal ticketing system, because I had learned by then to keep a paper trail of my own. He never responded to the ticket. 2 days later, HR called me in for an unscheduled sit-down. The woman across the desk, a soft-spoken HR rep named Patricia, told me Craig had raised concerns that I was, in her words, difficult to work with and making unfounded accusations against the shipping department. I asked her which accusations specifically. She looked down at her notes and admitted she did not actually have specifics, just a verbal complaint. I went back to my desk that day and just sat there for a minute, staring at my monitor, not typing anything. The real humiliation came the following week, in the Monday morning floor meeting, the one where the whole team stood around the shared printer table because the conference room was booked. Craig pulled up a shipment report with an error on it, an error that had come from a scheduling change he himself approved, and he read my name out loud in front of everyone. He asked me to explain myself. I started to, calmly, and he cut me off and told me to just apologize so we could move on with the meeting. So I did. I said I was sorry, in front of 14 people, for a mistake that was never mine. Afterward, Marisol from customer service caught up with me by the vending machines, glancing back toward Craig's office before she spoke. "Why didn't you push back in there?" she asked. "Everyone knows that wasn't on you." I clicked my pen once, out of habit, and looked at her. "Not yet," I said. The next Monday, Craig moved from professional to personal, and I felt the difference the second I sat down at my desk and saw a meeting request from him with the subject line time and attendance review. I walked into his office at 10 and he already had my timesheets pulled up on his monitor, 3 weeks of them, with certain entries circled in red. He turned the screen toward me and said he had reason to believe I had been clocking hours I did not actually work, specifically 2 Thursdays where I logged 8 hours, but he claimed security footage showed me leaving early. I asked to see the footage. He said that would not be necessary, that he was simply giving me a chance to explain myself before this went to HR as a formal write-up, possibly leading to termination. I had proof he was wrong, because I always kept my own records, a habit that had nothing to do with what was coming and everything to do with 3 years of watching how these situations tend to go. I pulled up my own badge access logs on my phone, timestamps that matched my timesheets exactly, both Thursdays. I set the phone on his desk and did not say anything. Craig glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds, then said the badge system was known to glitch sometimes, and he would still need to note this conversation in my file. He typed something while I sat there. I never saw what. Over the next 2 weeks, the write-ups started arriving with a rhythm to them, almost weekly, for things that never happened the way he described them. A missed deadline that was actually his own delayed approval. A customer complaint that customer service confirmed had never been filed. Each time, he had at least one other name attached as a witness, co-workers who signed off on his version because refusing Craig was its own kind of risk in that building. I brought one of the write-ups home and just sat at my kitchen table with it for a long time, not reading it again, just looking at his signature at the bottom. Then came the Friday that made the whole floor stop working. I was walking back from the loading dock when I saw 2 security guards waiting near my station, and Craig standing beside them with his arms crossed, talking just loud enough for the surrounding desks to hear. He said there had been a report of missing inventory from the East warehouse, and that as a precaution, all employees with recent access to that section would need to be checked before leaving for the day. He looked directly at me when he said recent access. They checked my bag first. Out of everyone on that floor. I stood there while one of the guards, a guy named Terrence who had always nodded politely to me in the break room, went through my bag item by item on top of my own desk, in full view of the warehouse, while at least 20 people slowed down or stopped entirely to watch. Nobody said anything. Nobody had to. Everybody understood exactly what Craig wanted them to think. There was nothing in my bag, obviously, because there had never been anything to find. Terrence zipped it back up, gave me an apologetic look, and told Craig it was clear. Craig just smiled, the kind of smile that was not really about the bag at all, and said, "Glad we could clear that up," in a tone that suggested the opposite, that this was never really about clearing anything up. My hand moved to my badge without me really deciding to do it, brushing over the old silver pen still clipped there where it always was. I did not say a single word back to him. I just watched him walk away, still smiling, already halfway to his next meeting like nothing had happened at all. That afternoon I got a Slack message from Craig asking me to stop by his office before end of day, no subject, no explanation, just a time. I did not answer right away. I went to the supply closet near the east hallway instead, shut the door most of the way, and stood there for a moment with the shelf of printer paper in front of me. I clicked the top of my pen twice, then clipped it back onto my badge exactly where it always sat. Rosa from accounting passed by while I was coming out and glanced at the pen the way people sometimes did, like she was seeing it for the first time even though she had seen it 100 times before. "That thing is older than my car," she said, half laughing. "Where did you even get it?" "It was my dad's," I said. "Never leaves my side." She nodded like that was answer enough, because it usually was, and went back to her desk without another thought about it. Nobody at that company had any reason to think twice about a pen. That was sort of the point. I walked into Craig's office a few minutes later. He was standing behind his desk instead of sitting, which he only did when he wanted to feel taller than the conversation. He started in about the timesheet issue again, said corporate might need to get involved if this kept up, said it in the tone of a man who had already decided how the story would end. Then he lowered his voice, the way people do when they think a door being mostly closed means nobody else can hear, and he said something to me that I will not repeat yet, because it matters more when you hear it the way I heard it. I kept my face still. I did not react the way he wanted me to. I just watched him say it, watched the certainty on his face like he believed there would never be any consequence for it at all. I clicked my pen once more before I left his office, and this time it was not out of nervousness at all. 2 days later, I was pulled out of a vendor call by an email from HR asking me to come to the main conference room immediately, no explanation given, and the moment I stepped out of my cubicle I could feel that something in the building had shifted. There were 2 police officers standing near the front reception desk. Craig was already talking to them when I walked up, gesturing with his hands the way people do when they want to look upset without actually being upset, and the second he saw me he raised his voice just enough for it to carry across the open floor. "That's her," he said. "That's the employee I told you about." One of the officers, a younger guy with a notepad already out, asked me to stay where I was for a moment while they finished getting a statement. I stood there while nearly every desk on that floor slowly stopped typing, stopped talking, turned to watch, the way people do when they sense something is happening but do not yet understand what. Craig told them I had threatened him directly in his office 2 days earlier, and that he had since discovered a discrepancy in company funds that he believed I was responsible for, something involving a vendor payment that had been rerouted. He said it with his hands moving, his voice climbing just enough to sound convincing, using words like concerned and frankly scared like he had rehearsed them. I asked to know exactly what discrepancy he was referring to. He would not look at me when he answered. He told the officers he had documentation back at his desk, that he would provide it formally, that right now his priority was making sure everyone on the floor was safe. Safe. That word landed harder than anything else he said, because it told me exactly what kind of story he was building, one where I was not just difficult anymore but dangerous. The younger officer asked me a few questions, and I answered every one of them clearly and calmly, which I could tell surprised him a little, because it did not match whatever Craig had already told him about me. But procedure is procedure, and Craig had gotten there first, had already shaped the room before I ever walked into it. The older officer said they needed to take me in based on the statement given and the nature of the accusation, that this would be sorted out properly once things were reviewed. They asked me to turn around. I felt the cuffs go on, cold and unfamiliar, and I heard Marisol somewhere near the vending machines say Craig's name under her breath in a tone that was not agreement. Nobody moved to stop it. Nobody really could. I understood that, even then. At-will employment does not just apply to whether you get fired. It applies to how much power the person above you has to shape a moment like this one before you even get a chance to speak. They walked me across the open floor, past desks I had sat near every day for 6 months, past people holding their phones up without even pretending not to, filming the woman getting walked out in handcuffs like it was the most interesting thing that had ever happened in that building. Nobody said a word to me. Nobody said a word to Craig either. The silence in that room was its own kind of verdict, one that had already been decided for me before any actual court would ever weigh in. I did not look back at him until we reached the doors, and when I did, he was not even looking at me anymore. He was already turning to Patricia from HR, saying something low, something that made her nod slowly and glance toward her computer like she needed to start writing something down immediately. I heard him say just enough of it to know exactly what kind of man I was dealing with. Something about how this Dana problem was finally taken care of, said with the kind of ease of a man who genuinely believed there would be no bill coming due for any of this. Nobody who mattered heard it yet. Just a coworker standing near the printer, someone who would not think to repeat it until much later, once it actually meant something. They put me in the back of the patrol car, and through the window I watched the building get smaller, watched people still standing at the windows with their phones raised. I did not cry. I did not argue. I sat there in the back seat with my hands cuffed in front of me, and I reached up, slow and steady, and clicked the top of my pen once. This time it was not nervous. This time it was exactly what I meant to do. They took the cuffs off once we got inside the station, sat me in a small room with a metal table and a camera blinking in the corner, and told me someone would be in shortly to take my statement. When Detective Ruiz finally walked in, he had a folder under his arm already labeled with my name, like the story had been written before I ever got a chance to add anything to it. "Before you start processing anything," I said, "I need 5 minutes. Just 5. He sat down slowly, the kind of slow that comes from a man who has heard 100 people ask for 5 minutes and regretted giving it to most of them. He said fine, 5 minutes, and folded his hands like he was already bracing for excuses. I did not give him excuses. I reached up and unclipped the pen from my badge, set it on the table between us, and told him it was not what everyone thought it was. "It is a recording device," I said. "Fully legal in this state, one-party consent, which means as long as I am part of the conversation, I am allowed to record it. I have been carrying it for months." He picked it up, turned it over once, and looked at me the way you look at someone who just handed you something heavier than it appears. I told him there was a file on it worth hearing before anything else happened to me, one conversation in particular, and I asked him to just listen before he decided what kind of person I was. He plugged it into a small player on the shelf behind him, and the room filled with Craig's voice, unmistakable, the same voice that had told 2 officers I was dangerous less than 2 hours earlier. On the recording he was coaching someone, a coworker whose voice I recognized but will not name yet, telling them exactly what to say if HR asked about the missing inventory. "Just say you saw her near that section Thursday," he said. "Doesn't have to be exact. Just enough to make it stick." Ruiz did not move. He just stared at the small speaker like it might contradict itself if he waited long enough. Then came the part that mattered most, Craig's voice again, lower, meaner, the exact conversation from his office 2 days before I was arrested, admitting on tape that the inventory issue never existed at all, that he had reported it specifically to build a case against me, followed by a direct threat, one that made even Ruiz's jaw shift slightly when he heard it. The room was quiet after it ended. Really quiet, the kind where you can hear the building's air system humming through the vents. Ruiz looked down at the folder with my name on it, then back up at me, like he was recalculating everything written inside it in real time. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "this recording. How long have you had all this?" "Months," I said. "And why," he asked, "would someone carry a device like this every single day, for months, before any of this happened?" I did not answer that part yet. I just held his gaze, calm the way I had been calm through every single humiliation that led me to this room. He set the folder down, leaned back slightly, and asked the question I had been waiting for since the moment I walked into that police station. "Who exactly do you work for?" I reached into my jacket pocket and set my real credentials on the table next to the pen, the ones I had never once shown anyone at that company. "I work for Halbrook Compliance Partners," I said. "I am a licensed corporate fraud investigator. I was placed at that branch 6 months ago after headquarters received 3 anonymous complaints about Craig Dalton, complaints involving falsified reports and retaliation against staff who raised concerns." Ruiz picked up the credentials, read them twice, then looked at me like he was rebuilding the last 2 hours of his own memory from scratch. "So the coordinator job," he said slowly. "Was cover," I said. I needed to be inside long enough to document a pattern, not just hear about one secondhand. Every conversation on that recording was gathered as part of a formal investigation file, already reviewed by legal counsel before today. None of it was collected to protect myself. It was collected because that was the job. He sat back, ran a hand across his jaw, and looked at the folder with my name on it like it had just become the wrong folder entirely. "Everything he told us this morning," Ruiz said, "about the threat, about the missing funds, was already contradicted by his own voice," I said, "on a recording made before any of it happened." He did not need me to explain further. I watched him pick up his phone and make a call I could only hear half of, something about releasing me immediately, no charges, insufficient basis, complainant credibility now in serious question. When he hung up, he looked at me with something closer to respect than suspicion, and told me I was free to go, effective immediately, and that they would need a full copy of the file for their own report. They brought Craig in that same afternoon. I was not in the room for it, but Ruiz told me enough afterward to know how it went. Craig walked in still confident, still talking, apparently trying the same tone he had used on the office floor that morning, explaining things with his hands, using the word concerned again like it still meant something. He assumed this was still about me. He had no idea yet that the recordings existed, let alone that they stretched back months, through write-ups that never happened the way he described them, through the timesheet accusation, through the day he had me searched by security in front of the entire warehouse floor. Ruiz told me Craig tried to bluff through the first 10 minutes, insisting there was some misunderstanding, insisting Dana Whitfield had clearly fabricated something to save herself. Then Ruiz played him the same file, and Craig apparently went very quiet during the part where his own voice coached a coworker on what to say about inventory that never went missing at all. By the time they told him what the recordings actually were, part of a formal investigation opened by his own employer months earlier, not something I had thrown together in a panic that morning, his face had changed completely. Ruiz described it as the look of a man doing math he did not want to be doing, realizing every write-up, every staged accusation, every meeting where he humiliated me in front of the whole floor was now sitting in an official file with his own voice attached to it. They read him the charges building against him. Filing a false police report. Retaliation. Falsification of employment records. Possible fraud tied to the vendor account he had accused me of touching, an account it turned out he had been quietly manipulating himself for months. Ruiz told me the exact line that finally landed on Craig, the one that made him stop talking altogether. "You called the police," Ruiz told him, "on the person investigating you." Craig was terminated within the week, and the news moved through that office faster than any Slack announcement ever could, faster even than the video of me in handcuffs had moved through people's phones a few days earlier. HR sent out a short, careful email about a leadership change effective immediately. Everyone understood what it actually meant. I went back to the branch one final time to help close out my file, and the atmosphere had shifted in a way I could feel the second I badged through the front door. People who had avoided eye contact with me for months suddenly wanted to talk. Marisol found me by the vending machines again, same spot as before, and this time she did not whisper. "I should have said something back when he had you apologize in that meeting," she said. "I knew that error wasn't yours. I just didn't want to be next." I told her she did not owe me an apology, that Craig had built an entire system designed to make speaking up feel more dangerous than staying quiet, and that the responsibility for that sat with him, not with the people who were scared of him. 2 other employees came forward once they realized what the recordings actually contained, both of them people Craig had coached at different points to back up stories that were not true. One of them, a warehouse associate named Deshawn, told HR directly that Craig had asked him weeks earlier to confirm seeing me near the east section on a day I was nowhere near it. He said he had gone along with it because Craig implied his hours would get cut if he did not cooperate. Once that came out, along with everything else, the picture of what had actually been happening at that branch for over a year became impossible for corporate to ignore. Headquarters sent a compliance team out within 2 weeks. They restructured how complaints got filed at that location, added a direct reporting line to corporate HR that did not run through the regional manager first, and required documented sign-off on any formal write-up, no more verbal complaints turning into permanent file entries overnight. It was the kind of change that should have existed already, the kind every employee half-joked about needing and never actually expected to get. They also issued a formal correction to my employment record, something in writing, on file permanently, stating plainly that the accusations Craig made were unfounded and that the termination proceedings tied to them were void. It did not undo the afternoon I spent in handcuffs walking across that floor while people filmed it. Nothing was going to undo that. But it meant the record itself would no longer carry his version of events. Some people never said anything to me at all, which was its own kind of answer, and I let it be. Not everyone has to reckon with what they watched happen and did nothing about. That was not really the assignment I was there for anyway. I stayed on for another few weeks to help transition the file properly, wearing the same badge, the same lanyard, and the same old silver pen clipped exactly where it had always been, except now there was nothing hidden about it at all. People knew what it was. Some of them looked at it differently now, a little more carefully, the way you look at something once you understand what it actually did. A new hire, a young guy from the shipping department who had started only a week earlier and clearly had not heard the full story yet, noticed it clipped to my badge one afternoon while we were both waiting on the printer. "That's a nice pen," he said. "Family thing?" I looked down at it for a second, clicked the top once out of pure habit, and smiled just slightly. "It was my dad's," I said. "Never leaves my side." The call from Holbrook came on a Tuesday, and I almost let it go to voicemail because I assumed it was just another case assignment. It was not. The regional director on the other end offered me a permanent position overseeing internal compliance for that whole territory, based on how the investigation had been handled from start to finish, patient, documented, airtight enough that legal never had to scramble to defend a single piece of it. She was careful to say it was not about what happened to Craig. It was about proving the process worked when someone followed it all the way through instead of cutting corners under pressure. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Before I left that branch for good, I sat at my old desk one more time, the same chair, the same monitor, the same view of the loading dock through the side window. I did not linger over it the way people do in movies. I just clicked the pen once, out of habit, the same motion that used to mean something guarded and now meant nothing more than a person tapping a pen while they thought. Marisol walked by and asked if I was going to miss the place. I told her I would miss the people who stayed decent when it would have been easier not to. I did not think about Craig much after that, not the way people probably expected. This was never really about beating him. It was about a system doing exactly what it was supposed to do, slowly, quietly, without needing anyone to raise their voice to make the truth undeniable once it finally surfaced. I clipped the pen back onto my new badge that following Monday, still the same one, still worn at the clasp, and walked into a building I had never worked in before, wondering, not for the first time, how many other quiet new hires out there were sitting at desks right now, keeping their heads down, waiting for their own moment to matter.